What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Patros Podcast, where we're embracing healthy masculinity. My name is Allan, and we're going through a series called Masculinity Through the Bible, Jonah the Reluctant Leader. And as many men know, often we struggle with being leaders, and we're often reluctant to do so. So we thought, why not go through a story of one of the most famous reluctant leaders, Jonah. So Jeff, who do we have with us today?
Yeah, today on the Patros Podcast, we are very pleased to welcome Pastor Ken Thompson, lead pastor, Bay City
You say that
Fellowship.
now. Let's get to the end before I see how pleased y'all are.
We do a heavy vetting process before we invite anybody on this show.
I'll take that. I appreciate that.
Well, man, we're excited to get into this part of the story of Jonah, where he is, I think, wrestling with God's choices, right? And so this fascinating topic, and I know you talked even just personally how the topic is kind of hitting home. Yeah. So excited to get into that today. It's going to be Jonah 4, the first 4 verses. But before we do that, we got to get to know our guest. Okay. So tell us, who is Ken Thompson?
All right. So I know this is both video and audio, so it doesn't matter where I look. Just talk to y'all.
No, you just natural.
But if you feel weird doing a ping pong thing, you can just
So
look at Allan. He's better looking. So
we won't deny that. All right. So I currently have lived in the Tampa Bay area for about 9 years, and what brought me to Florida was a desire, calling, open door to plant a church. So, church, I, by God's grace, not only was a part of planting, but continue to pastor Bay City's Fellowship. Turns 8 years old this coming September, which is a huge blessing and kindness of God, especially given our story. But definitely have a heart for the gospel, seeing people reached. With the good news of Jesus. Florida is a place that has I have a lot of love for Florida. I was born and raised in Michigan. I was not born into a Christian home. I know. Listen, I was going to bring up the fact that we beat the national champions.
I know.
Ohio State.
You got the trump card.
We got the trump card this year. Past few years, actually.
Okay, all right. Moving on.
So just turning that knife a little more.
Listen, it's easy to do with Buckeyes fans recently.
I know.
So my mom and dad were not believers when I was brought into this world. No one in their family was. And so if you've ever been to Michigan, like January, February, it's a rough place to live. And so they actually twice, when I was a kid, tried to move and relocate to Florida.
No way.
And I actually lived in St. Pete for a couple of years when I was a boy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 6th Street, I think 9th Street, somewhere down there. And we always had a love for Florida. We'd come to St. Pete Beach on vacation.
Yeah.
I was just in Ohio.
Oh, yeah, you get it.
There's a reason people
especially
live in
Ohio.
I couldn't get wait to get.
But Ohio, come on. So
it might as well have been Michigan. It was right on the lake. It was terrible.
It might as well. It's all bad. So when I was, just make a long story short, came to know the Lord as a teenager. My parents, God saved them really out of the blue. A witness of a coworker led my mom to the Lord, and just some pretty incredible stuff happened. Had a call, desire to follow the Lord into ministry, pursued that, went through college, youth ministry, MDiv, felt very clearly called to plant a church, but didn't know where. So as I was praying where, and also when, who, kind of all those important questions, Florida kept on coming back up. And I'll be really honest. I was in Minnesota when that happened, so I had
in February.
In February, I had to fight really hard with like why Florida, and I thought South Florida at first. Actually, not like where Megan had family was near Fort Lauderdale.
Okay,
so a lot of opportunities down that way, a lot of needs that I felt very drawn to, and because I didn't want to plant alone, partnerships were really important. And we had some, providential partnerships start surfacing Tampa Bay area. So Megan and I, prayed through it, talked through it, explored, and it made it really clear that Lord was leading us here. So we moved down here 2016. When we moved down, we had 3 children, Olivia, Ella, and Nolan. And then the Lord gave us another one, Layla. So we have 4 kids all together. Wow. 15, 13, 9, and almost 7. Yeah. And I love sports, Michigan guy. So one note on that. So my son, who's 9, loves football, loves the Wolverines, loves the Lions. All he's known is those teams succeeding.
Winning. He just did not.
So,
we need to give him a dose of reality, dose of history.
He cried when the Lions lost this year. And I was just like, he's like, what happened? I was like, son. I was like, dude,
this happens all the time.
Yeah, this is par for the course, bro. 40, the last time the Lions were like this was actually when I was your age. When I was 9, they won the division, had a playoff win. And I was like, and it's been that long, bro. Yeah. So he's processing so he was playing. So this is great. He was playing 2K with me, and he says, and he picked the Pistons, and he's like, Dad, very contemplatively, why do all the Detroit teams stink so much? And I was like, son, welcome to the club.
Welcome to reality, buddy. You get it.
You know what it's. You know what it
welcome
means
to
now.
manhood.
Yeah. Welcome to Michigan
rite
manhood.
of passage as a
rite
Michigan.
of passage. And he's like, I don't like it very much, but whatever. So,
that's hilarious.
Anyways, I don't know what else. What else you want to hear?
You were you with Steve Pettit?
No, I never traveled with Steve Pettit.
Who was it that you traveled with? Oh no, you were BJU.
So I did travel. So I don't know if it's still an ongoing organization, but I traveled with a couple different things. One was I traveled for a summer with something called Neighborhood Bible Time. Okay. Don't hold any of these on me because this is a long time ago.
Google that later.
Neighborhood Bible Time was one summer. I took a semester off of school and traveled with something called the Minutemen Evangelistic Team.
Yes, okay, that's what it was.
So I get this.
This has to be good.
Listen. I traveled. It was a ministry that
you were singing.
I was not personally. I did
preaching.
sing a part of it. So it was me, another college age guy, and a husband and wife team, and we would travel into a church. We'd show up on a Wednesday, meet the youth group, and then Thursday and Friday we would go out like sometimes alone, sometimes with some of the students, and try to, and this is intentional, recruit teenagers. This is winter 2002. What happened in fall of 2001?
Yes.
9/11, right?
Yes.
So it was Army. It was called The War. So think of this.
The program was called The War.
The program was called The War. Yeah. I was the Navy captain.
You're the Navy captain?
I had khaki pants, a Navy sponsored T-shirt or it's polo. Yeah. I would so
did you get arrested for impersonating and all?
Listen, I got schools would. So we would go to bus stops. We'd walk the premises of high schools. Yeah. This is 2002, so I had a piece of paper in my hand, and I would try to get your first name and number. And this was my spiel. I'd be like, "Hey man, have you heard about the war?" And they'd look at me. They look. Listen,
this is so good. This is so good.
Well, I knew there was something.
They would look at me like confused. I'm like, no, not the war over in Iraq. But the 3-day competition at Jones River Baptist Church, and they'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
You're like,
and then I had a spiel. I would try to get your first name and phone number, so on Saturday morning I could call you, get you to come out, be a part of my team. It was.
That's awesome.
It was.
Was it similar to Special Forces?
That's exactly what it was.
Okay,
it was the same entity.
The same. Okay.
So that was Special Forces was for schools. This was for churches.
I'm just the bad pickup lines in bars that guys have used. Ken's like, they got nothing on what I did to get people to
ministry.
What I asked people to do, and what people said in response, I won't repeat. It was awful. It was cringy on my part, horrible on theirs.
Needless to say, you've had a very a cool experience with ministry.
I we might touch on this later. I think my dad died pretty traumatically when I was 13. And so before I was a believer, he was a believer, praise the Lord. But and I mean this intentionally, for better or worse, pastors, youth pastors, ministry leaders were mentors in my life.
Yeah.
And so ministry for me has anywhere been just like a part of who I am, and sometimes an idol, or a lot of times like stuff I had to work through. Even what we're talking about today, wrestling with God, a lot of my wrestlings have revolved around why am I in ministry. But that being said, I didn't have a dad, in my adolescent years. And so there was a couple men in my church that, poured into me. And so how I approached life was, okay, these 3 guys are like my heroes. What did they do? And how do I do the same? So a lot of my college, early 20s experience was trying to run back the play that they ran. So, and consequently, it led to some cool experiences and a lot of fun ministry opportunities. But, were they always like the best for like who I am and God's calling? Probably not. But I lived to tell the tale, and God used it. And I'd say there was a lot of, genuine, like once I got into the trenches of those ministries, like the Lord would work in me and sometimes even through me. But I really did. I did a lot of the stuff, man, back in the day.
I think everybody should. We've talked down. I've talked about this. Everybody should have a sales job. Like, I don't care if you're going to be a nurse, you're going to be a teacher, you're going to be, because everybody is selling something.
Yeah.
And it's really a good life skill to be able to handle rejection.
Yeah.
And that I can only imagine prepared you for that.
Door-to-door ministry is even more rejection.
Yeah.
So like your conversion rate is a lot lower.
I spent a year in sales in between. So I got married. Megan was finishing school. I spent a year in sales. Over the phone, like indoor sales team, which was awful. Having someone, there's something unique for your faith to have someone cuss you out.
Yeah.
Like for trying to share the gospel with them. Now, I get it. My ways were pretty unorthodox. Or I probably would have cussed me out too.
At least you didn't do like, hey kids, I got candy. Come to our event.
Yeah.
So, no, I never, by God's grace, never did weird stuff like that. I've seen people do weird stuff like that, which is awful.
You know what though, but it's just it's a sign of the times. I was meeting with a guy yesterday and he was talking about, we used to go to the park and we'd give kids candy and to get him to get on the bus and take him to ministry. Like, I was like, but it was in his mind.
That was normal.
It was totally normal, right? Because they were taking inner city kids,
Yep.
bringing them to their service, and then they bring them back. And the moms are like,
bro,
take my kids.
No.
Like, I'm tired of them. Take them. So,
and truth be told, I did bus routes back in the day.
Yeah.
So we would go and, pick up kids on a church van or bus and bring them to church and, take them home. And
nowadays you're getting the hotline called on.
There was a guy that I worked with that his name was Juan, and he was like from Puerto Rico, and he said like we got into the neighborhood, and he had told my friends that he bought a bunch of candy, and we're knocking doors, sales, and he was like, I'm gonna go to the park of the neighborhood and tell the kids to go tell their parents that Mr. Juan has candy for us. And then everybody was like, dude,
you can't do that.
No, don't.
Cannot do that.
You're like, no, bro, it'll attract a crowd. Yeah, a bunch of angry moms with pitchforks.
They'll want security, but it won't be what you're selling.
No.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, I like having pastors on this series, the Jonah series, has been so fun because everybody's a little different.
Yeah.
And to hear the takes and everything.
Yeah.
When it comes to church planning, because that's a thing that I love it. I'm entrepreneurial, so I really dig the whole church planning thing. But most people, like, they're thinking church planning, and that's like public speaking to them. It's like the biggest fear in life. You want me to plant a church, but what's the greatest joy and what's the greatest challenge? I'll let you handle them however you want.
Of planting, of pastoring, of both. Like,
I would say planting in particular, but then you can parlay that into a pastoring.
So the greatest challenge for me, I'll just speak for myself.
Yeah.
In planting was a lot of it's going to be contextual. So I'll speak of just the greatest challenge for me planted in Tampa Bay in the season of life we're in, is that Tampa Bay has enough Southern religious influence that if you don't have brick and mortar branding, I guess like whether someone grew up in church or just knows like loosely about the church, they have a depiction of what it is. It's something that
not foreign concepts
they come to and they leave. It's something that they can drive by. It's something that is a more or less a building than a people. And so to come and invite someone to be a part of a church plant when you don't have a building.
You want me to go to a school?
Or my favorite moment.
Or a barn?
So like this was a lot of my zeal that lacked knowledge. So when we were very early days of this, we would every Sunday night meet down in Ari Olds Park in Oldsmar. We would bring grill, a cornhole, coolers, and just be like, we're trying to plant a church, and we believe that the church is people. And so we're going to lean heavily into people-oriented ministry over, hey, we're going to invest in a building and programs. Now, there's a need for both. But the reality was, I remember very vividly, we had the grill set up in a pavilion. We had the cornhole going. Our team was there ready. And I was just walking around the park being like, hey, come, like, would you want to come over and, have some dinner with us? And they're like, who are you? I'm like, well, I'm Ken. I'm trying to start a church here in Oldsmar. They're like, start a church? Like, well, what's its name? Well, we don't quite have a name yet. Where do you meet? Well, right over here in this park. And they're like, oh, you're a cult, dude. Like, get out of here. Like, you're a cult, like, there's no way. Like, call us when you have a name and number, and so
call us when you're serious.
Like, call us when you're real. And I'm like, I'm as real. I'm like, I'm Acts 2 real, baby. Like,
we don't more real than you know.
So like trying to hold the tensions of, I have this biblical philosophical conviction of like what church ought to look like. And yet I'm in 2020 something Tampa Bay. And there are people here that have their own ideas, for better or worse, of what church looks like. So like holding the tension of like, what are my non-negotiables related to church life, for lack of a better term? And how do I hold or let go of that contextually with the thought of reaching people? That, to this day, is the hardest thing about planting a church for me. Because there are things that I'm like, man, if we did this more differently, we would have such a different feel, vibe, amount of people. But because of still to this day what I believe convictionally about the type of church we wanted to plant, holding on to some of those things has brought certain limitations that I wish weren't the case, but that are still there. So that has been probably one of the hardest things for me planting, is like accepting there are key core convictions that will limit some metrics of limit some external metrics of success.
Right, which are really superfluous, and yet every pastor that I know of uses them. Right.
Well, reality is what you catch them with is what you keep them with, and so when you don't give into those convictions, you're keeping them with what your convictions should be.
So I will say this. So like the flip side of that, the positive side of that, the benefit is, man, the people that have more or less again said like yes to being a part of this, there's a certain depth to those relationships that I've never experienced in a church before. And that's not saying that like our church is uniquely better. It's just more of like that experience for them and for me. Man, it's sweet. Like I would say one of the unexpected joys and blessings of planting / pastoring are the sacred moments of life you get to be a part of. The marrying and burying aspect of pastoring seems like mundane. I'll be honest, it's been the best part of like those are sacred moments
Yeah.
that you're invited into, and to be a part of is, it's so sweet.
Yeah.
It's so formational. It really does remind you, oh, this is why, and this is what shepherding in its maybe
good.
like purest form looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I'll say it this way, like the challenge of planting has allowed me to form some depth of relationship that I don't know if otherwise we would have had as quickly and as deeply, to have some of those sacred moments that are just like, I wouldn't trade those for the world.
Yeah.
We had our first, this sounds kind of crazy, we had our first member funeral this past weekend.
Yeah.
So I've done some family funerals, but I've never done a funeral
For
for
One
a
of your
member
members.
and family
Yeah.
of our church. It was bittersweet. She was elderly. They had Lynn. Lynn had a son and daughter and kids, and also a daughter and son-in-law and kids that were part of the church and still are. It was just last week. And so it was really bittersweet to walk through that with them. But man, the experience of forging through that is priceless.
Wow.
I wanted to ask you, because I'm listening to you talk, and you'd mentioned earlier that your dad had passed and there were a couple men that had stepped in. But I want to fast forward and ask you today, Patros is Greek for father, but it's more than just father. It's like it's almost a supernatural kind of covering. The guy who doesn't talk much, but then when he does, it's like all this wisdom spews out, and it's a nurturing, guiding, maybe disciplinary, but like it's loving. I just wonder about now. Do you have guys that help you navigate this pastoring process? Is there anybody that speaks into you in that way?
Yeah. So there's two that come to mind right away, and in very different ways they speak in. So should I name them? Is that
Whatever you want. Yeah.
So one is someone that I know you probably know of, I assume, and I know Steph knows of.
Yeah.
It's a guy named Skip Dvornik.
Oh.
So
No, Skip well.
so Skip.
Is that lawyer?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah. So
So cool.
Skip used to be the on staff at Calvary. Has spent a lot of his life in this area, running a law firm, working at church ministry. Skip was assigned to help me when I first moved down here to plant our church. He worked with me, and Skip taught me a lot of invaluable lessons about work ethic and entrepreneurship and all that comes in with starting something. I would say there haven't been many men in my life that have remained so close and so near and dear when it comes to giving me instruction and mentorship around how to love my wife and children well.
Yeah.
Not only is he a model of it personally, when we talk, like he's happy about church stuff, but his eyes light up. His disposition changes when we talk about my marriage and my children.
Yeah.
So anywhere from his example to his investment to his ongoing interest, it means the world. So
Wow.
Skip is huge when it comes to like my marriage and family. Another, and this I would say this other one. So Skip is a father figure. He's old, not like old, but old
Older
enough
than
to
you.
where, old enough to where like I think he's old.
Yeah.
So he's probably not that old. So I apologize. So Skip is great. And then another guy. The last thing will be familiar. You probably I don't know if you won't know him probably personally. His name is Elliot Grudem. So Elliot, the son of Wayne. You might know Wayne. Elliot runs a ministry called Leaders Collective that focuses so you've heard of like dog whisperers.
Yeah.
Elliot's like a pastor whisperer.
Okay.
And Elliot's about 10 years older than me. And when it comes to my emotional, spiritual, ministry health, his investment in my life, man,
Wow.
his ministry, like formally, but personally, in the past 3 to 4 years changed the trajectory of my life.
Wow.
And there's a lot I could say. A lot I probably will address today in wrestling.
Yeah.
He in some ways invited me into a season of wrestling, but walked me through wrestling with God.
That's
that changed my life. So Elliot and Skip, shout out. Just 2 great godly friends, mentors, men in my life that I wouldn't be who I am without them.
Yeah, well, ditto on Skip.
Yeah,
for me
Skip's
as well.
great, yeah. Love that guy.
And you know, that's where we purchased.
Steph told me that. That's pretty awesome.
So
I'm really
just
excited.
really
That's
really
so cool
to see how that came through. So, you know, in thinking about, you know, we're talking about Jonah, the reluctant leader, and just before we get into the scriptures, though, I'd love to get your take on what, as you're pastoring people, surely you have seen guys that are not, they're reluctant. They're not taking the next step. They're not growing in their faith. They're not being the man or leader that God has called them to be. What, in your estimation, is holding men back today?
So I think my take on this, like, so when I hear the word reluctance, I think of a passivity. But the guys I would think are most reluctant to step into whatever God's calling them to, I wouldn't necessarily like label them as passive men. I probably would say there's a lot of pride there.
Oh, interesting.
So often the reluctancy to step up, to lead well, is that they know it's going to require a certain amount of sacrifice, or even just simply admitting, I'm wrong. I've not done this well. I've not done this right. I failed. People don't want to admit that. It's hard. It hurts. I mean, like, I don't want to admit it.
Yeah.
But I see, like, there's a certain baseline of pride, a certain amount of maybe even fear of being exposed, a fear of, like, I failed.
Yeah.
That keeps men, at least the ones I've dealt with primarily, from stepping up or stepping into roles that God has called them into, to lead in.
Yeah.
And that could be in the home, that could be in work, that could be in the church, that could even just be leading themselves well.
For sure.
I would say just a baseline of pride of, like, I don't want to admit I don't have all the answers, or I don't want to admit my answers are wrong.
Yeah.
It's like, you need to fix yourselves to get this in order, opposed to saying, no. I need to listen and learn and grow myself.
Yeah.
And then in turn be humble enough to step forward or into whatever God has called them into. So that's like my 30-second pitch on that.
You got some solid guys at Bay Cities that, like, they're, I mean, as far as the guys that I know, that they're just guys that really want to jump into ministry, right?
Yeah. So we have, I would say, we've got a core group of some really good young men in our church.
Yeah.
Like,
I think,
and I would not, so the men I'm thinking
which
about,
isn't typical.
praise
for a
the
lot of
Lord,
churches.
that's God's kindness. The men that I'm thinking about are not those guys.
No.
Yeah.
No, the reason I said that was,
Yeah.
like, that's what's cool about your church, is that you do have, like, because they're all friends of mine or friends with friends of mine.
So,
and I'm like, I mean, they're not just, like, guys that like ministry. They're guys that are passionate about Jesus.
So the guys that Allan's referring to, I got about probably 5 or 7 guys in their 20s,
like,
who are anything but reluctant.
They're dogs.
Yeah. They're more.
Like, they've been
more
about
like,
it for a minute.
like they're running forward, and like they're falling forward or failing forward
and willing to.
So there's not a reluctancy with those guys. The reluctancy, where I see the most reluctancy with men, what I say, men be probably more or less my age, late 30s, early 40s. They have enough life experience where, like, they should know better, right? They should be doing things differently, but aren't. And when they're invited to consider change, to consider doing it a way that looks more like Jesus, it's anywhere from an affront of, like, how could you, to deep down a wound of, like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But to actually make that change and to step forward into the transformational work of the Spirit, it's scary, it's unknown, it's uncertain. And I think most of us would just want to like figure it out on our own, or do it like, maybe if I just do it this way or look at it this way, that will fix it.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of pride, a lot of fear.
Well, speaking of change, when we get into today's lesson, there was a change that ends up happening in last week's portion of the scripture and portion of the story, in as much as you've got people repenting.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And that elicits a response unbecoming a prophet, or at least you would think, God's man, right? Yeah. So we're gonna pick up there in Jonah 4, and I know we talked to the theme a little bit about wrestling, but ultimately we're gonna step into your classroom and have you kind of walk us through what's going on in these first 4 verses in Jonah 4.
All right. Well, I appreciate the privilege to jump in here. So let me just read it.
Yeah.
So I'm reading from the ESV here. Jonah chapter 4, it says, "But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord." I love this. "Oh Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish."
I'm sorry, you're right. It's like, bro, I told you this. Why'd you make me go?
So I think what's interesting, and this is like a side note, but it's tangential but related. Often when we read scripture, we read it kind of like soberly or even just methodically, and we miss some of the humanity here. This is hilarious. I mean, sadly funny. Like Jonah's just like, really, like, are you kidding me? Like, I told you, right? I knew this would happen. So like he's honestly dialoguing with God, and so this is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. He knows that, and he's upset about it, which says a lot about Jonah. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, "Do you do well to be angry?"
The ESV just gets it, right?
And I added my nuance there. I added my nuance, but do you do well? Like, are you so sure about why you're angry right now? Like, come on, man. So, like, there's so much here, just in the text itself, anecdotally in our lives. But just to summarize, and you kind of hinted to this, like, as far as like ministers go and ministry goes, I mean, like, Jonah hits the home run, right? Mm-hmm. Like he gets what all of us want, like the success. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was talking with Megan about Jonah. She's studying through it, or I don't know. She was reflecting on like how big Nineveh is. Yeah. Like, it's a big city. Mm-hmm. Like, it takes them like several days just to get through it. But in doing so, the whole town is turned upside down. I mean, it's a revival that, like, we read of, like,
you can't comprehend.
Billy Graham.
Yeah, this is a Billy Graham kind of response.
Without speakers or anything.
I mean, just like top to bottom.
Just word of mouth.
I mean, just things get turned upside down.
Yeah.
And, just from like the practical side of a prophet's ministry, like, how can you be upset about this?
Yeah.
But he is. And he's not just like his displeasure isn't just in the fruit of his work. Like, he is genuinely upset with God.
Yeah. With God's graciousness.
Because he understands that this isn't because of him. Like Jonah I mean, like, this is why I tried to flee. Yeah. Like, he understands clearly this work, this revival, this transformation is the work of God.
Yeah, like his heart, he knows his heart.
He knows his heart.
And so while his external may be this, his internal is the other thing. And so he knows this is not me. I
think, and this is what's interesting and oddly beautiful about Jonah is he's real. And I think, if we're talking about, an aspect of manhood, there's a lot of men that have pretense, that project, that are just fake. And one of the things I think is beautiful about this, in a weird way, is he's honest before the Lord.
Yeah.
Now his honesty reveals that he's got some messed up stuff inside.
Yeah.
But at the same time, hey, at least he's honest.
Putting the cards on the table.
Putting the cards on the table. And I think it's important that we understand how helpful in God's kindness this is for us to see behind the veil.
Yeah.
So we're seeing Jonah behind the veil, and we're seeing Jonah's wrestling with the Lord. And what is he wrestling over? He's wrestling over he's not just wrestling over what God has done, but this is key here. He's wrestling over with who God is.
Yeah.
So I think this is really important for us to understand, not just about Jonah, but about the Lord. The Lord's actions, like what God does is, and this is like, me tipping my hat towards my theology. I don't believe God is accidental. Mm-hmm. I believe everything God does is with intention. Mm-hmm. And I think in this case is God acts not just with intention, but God's actions are always in alignment or consistent with his character. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we learn a lot about the character of God. And what I think is funny about that is the character of God in this passage is in juxtaposition with the character of Jonah. Mm. So just like for a minute, let's think about this. How, from your own study of Jonah, which obviously we've heard the story, familiar story. Yeah. But even these few verses here, I'm really curious, how would you more inductively, Jonah deduces the character of God for us. Yeah. How would you guys inductively define or describe the character of Jonah based on what you're seeing, at least here in these few verses?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I'd love for you, it's not rhetorical. I'd love for you guys to.
No, I know, I get
answer, it. Yeah. Just to be clear, I like
just
that.
Just there.
It's not a rhetorical question. Yeah. Yeah, I mean he's got a heart issue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is what I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I think about Jesus, the thing that Jesus came, and in Matthew you get this more than the other Gospels, I think, but it's this, you have heard it said, but I say unto you. Mm-hmm. And everybody was doing you have heard it said. And it's kind of like Jonah is that mindset, that Pharisaical mindset on the one hand. On the other hand, he also has this wild understanding of grace because he knew beforehand that God is kind and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love. Yeah. Those words, they come off my tongue a lot because I know that that's the character of God, and Jonah did too. So, like, I'm looking at this saying Jonah on the one hand is like pretty Pharisaical, because how could you not offer this grace and goodness to everybody else? But on the other hand, he has got a really good understanding of God, which is that he is gracious and compassionate. Yeah. So I think I see a tension in Jonah's spirit over what's happening here with God.
Yeah. What about you, Allan?
There's this picture of or there's a video where, I don't know if you know who Holy Gabbana is.
I don't. Well, I'm 42, so.
Who doesn't know who Holy Gabbana is?
Yeah. So he was a rapper called Boonk Gang from Jacksonville.
Oh, no. I still
still don't know.
So he was like wilding out, crazy stuff, just like living a reckless life. And he got saved. And then, now all he does is preach the gospel. Like, all he does is talk about Jesus. He'll go to the mall and talk about Jesus. And so now he's also on podcasts, because he used to be famous for a certain lifestyle. Now people are having him on and being like, what's this transformation?
Yeah.
Like, you were crazy.
Yeah.
Like, when you're talking about rappers, he was like, rappers thought he was crazy.
Yeah.
And there was a guy interviewing him, and he was explaining the grace of God to the guy. And the guy was like, hold on. You're saying like a serial killer can say, Jesus, I have sinned against you as a holy God, And if I repent, that guy, God will give grace to him. Like, that guy can go to heaven. And like Holy Gobana was like, yeah, actually, like, because I'm no better than him. And the guy was like, no, that's not okay. Well, to what you said, like, Jonah has an understand, like, Jonah actually understands that guy's gonna go to heaven.
Yeah.
But he has the same heart of that. I don't want that.
Yeah.
And that's what I picture is, like, you have this guy that theologically has the understanding of, pretty much has a theological understanding like a demon.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I have a deep belief and understanding in who God is because I know that to be true. But I actually, like, my heart is at enmity with God in this moment.
Yeah.
I don't want God to be gracious to people like the prodigal son.
Yeah.
So that's the picture in my head, is like a mix between a non-believer, a demon who does believe, but doesn't follow.
Yeah, those are great. I mean, both those, I mean, I appreciate you answering those on the spot there.
Yeah.
You know, I look at Jonah, I just think to some degree he's kind of petty. To know that about God, but then to even experience God in action, and then to arrive at a place where he's like, really? Like, and I say petty, like, that's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
It's his honest reflection of the Lord is, in some senses, like, humorous, but it's also alarming.
Yeah.
Because, you know, let's be real. What's to some degree true of Jonah is going to be true of us at some point.
Yeah.
To some degree.
Yeah.
And so I think seeing Jonah's, like, I think it's often very easy. I think especially in other parts of Scripture, like with the apostles, and like when they're just Jesus's disciples, so to speak, and you're like, how could they do that? Or why? Like, if I was with Jesus, it'd be so much different and better.
Yeah.
And I would say why this particular moment hits me hard is, and I can be candid, right?
Yeah,
like,
as candid as you want to be.
Please.
So,
It's just three of us on the couch.
Yeah.
and the two of you out on
Stare at the
YouTube, land,
camera.
right? Yeah. to the massive audience, you know, the multitude listening.
Yeah.
If for some reason this would ever get to a member of my church, I just want to just kind of be really candid about a moment here. So, you know, I've been in the area 9 years, and for about 7 of those years, maybe 8 of those years, just met a lot of like ministry, like walls of like things not going how I wish they would, differently, or just not at all.
Yeah.
And in 2024, it really felt like the Lord, like things we've been praying for, like for our family, for my church, just came out. Like, just like God, like, blessed us. And in many ways, you would, if you had tracked with my story, would expect me to be like, this is awesome.
Yeah, we did it.
Like we did it.
Yeah.
Look at us now. Look what we have. This past spring, I sat with some fellow pastor friends of mine in a group cohort I'm a part of, and was like basically pulling a Jonah. Like, look what God did, but like, it could have been better.
You're like kind of anticlimactic though.
Yeah, kind of like, and it was really funny. And this is where I was so grateful. I had one of my friends like turn up on me and just be like, "Are you kidding me? Like, are you for real?"
I like that friend.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's actually in the area too. Aaron Prophet, shout out. Lathia Church.
Yeah, that's over in Tampa.
Wesley Chapel.
Yeah.
Tampa. But the reality of like, there are moments in life where we see God at work. We see God even bless the work of our hands. But like, this is why this story personally resonates with me. It wasn't what I wanted it to be, how I wanted it to be. No,
Yeah.
it's different. It's not, it's like apples and oranges, or maybe, fruit and vegetables.
Yeah.
But that reality of seeing God act in his character to do good things in and through you, but to come out and be like, really?
Man.
Like, I asked for this, and this is what you gave me. Like, I have to admit, like, I'm in many ways that pettiness, that selfishness in Jonah, I'm guilty of as well. And it's hard to admit it because it's on the other side of God's blessing. And here in Jonah, I mean, his ministry as a prophet, God sends him to a place with this powerful but, controversial message, and they could reject him. They could kill him. Instead, they receive it, repentance, and now he's like upset. That's just kind of petty and selfish.
Yeah.
And it's indicative of a character that needs to be like a heart that needs to be transformed.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this passage as well is we see the type of character it needs to be transformed into, and that's just of the Lord's. Listen to how he describes the Lord's character. This is who our God is. He's gracious. He's merciful. He's slow to anger. He's abounding in steadfast love. And he's relenting from disaster. Now, like, minus the relenting from disaster, that, like, gracious, like, that goes back.
Yeah.
That's been like the rehearsal of, the God of, Jacob and Isaac and Abraham. Like, that's how they know God, the God of Moses.
Yeah.
They know God as that God. And what's awesome is, like, that phrase has been perpetuated throughout all of the family, all of the people of God. We know God that way. God acts based on that character. And this is important because whatever internal wrestlings that Jonah has, it is in contrast to who his God is. So I think in this moment, when you read through this story, whatever is fueling Jonah's wrestlings, intentions, and frustration with God, it is because he is demonstrating character that I would suggest is opposite of the character of God. So now it's like, okay, well, what does that, like, mean for us?
Yeah.
Well, I think a couple things here. Number one, and you guys can respond to this with questions or take it one way or the other. I think we're given a blueprint. So, like, the character of God is not, like, abstract, right? Like, it's real, it's personal, it's in the form of Jesus. So it's not just this, like, theoretical, conceptual thing. No, this is like a pattern that we ought to follow. It's what the Spirit is molding us and transforming us into.
Yeah.
And so it's not just like a lofty goal that, like, no, this is an invitation. And we see this evident in the life of Jonah, because he was giving the gospel to a people that needed it. So those traits are true in his life. So there's like, okay, how are we made more into that image? But then I think there's also an interesting part here that we can maybe, like, look at as well, and that God allows Jonah to dialogue with him. And God allows, so I think what's fascinating about Jonah's last statement, that he's relenting from disaster. So I think what's interesting, like, I think, culturally speaking, questioning our authorities is, like, I'd say maybe now more than ever, there's space for it. There's it's welcome in the right time, in the right space, in the right way. But like all of us have experienced moments where when we question why our authorities do what they do or say what they say, or we question them, there's a genuine fear, like, will I lose my job? Will I be scorned? Will I be shamed? Will I be punished? Like, what will happen if I give feedback that isn't great?
Yeah.
And what I love about God, like, and you see this all over the Psalms, is he gives space for us to wrestle with him.
Yeah.
Even in areas that feel like, to some degree, forbidden.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what I think is happening here. Here's a forbidden, like, not just like, like he's saying, God, how could you? Like, how could you help these people that are our enemies, that are not deserving, that, like, deserve your punishment, but you give grace? Like, I told you. Like, how could you do this? And not just how could you do this, how could you even use me?
Yeah.
Like, I tried to get away.
Yeah.
And it's mind-blowing, even what he's saying. But I think what's more mind-blowing is the fact that God relents from disaster. Not just, he doesn't just hold back from punishing Nineveh. He holds back from punishing Jonah. But Jonah maybe is a little obtuse to realize what God is doing even with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's often true for us.
Yeah.
That we are quick to look at what God does or who God works with or these different aspects of God's, but we're usually reluctant to look at ourselves.
Yeah. You know, you talk about space to wrestle. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that image. And of course, we know in certain people in the scriptures when they wrestled with God what happened, right? But the point is they were allowed to. And I know, you know, I got radically saved after, you know, growing up in the church. And I remember thinking that I didn't want to really study the scriptures when I was younger because I kind of believed they were all fake. And so even though I didn't really have a real relationship with God, at least I had kind of a general reverence for the guy, you know, the man upstairs and the holy book, right?
Yep.
But I didn't actually want to read it because if I read it, then, I mean, that's just a bunch of nonsense and it wasn't going to hold up. You know, I remember thinking that. And then I, you know, got to a place of desperation in my story. And I remember this. I was driving across the causeway. And this had been maybe 2.5 years after my affair. And I had been radically transformed. I was in his word all the time and just soaking him up in every way. And, you know, when you're outed for being the sinner that you are and you know yourself to be, but not everybody can see it, it's a humbling position. And so you don't really have a problem with the whole, like, I'm a sinner thing because it's quite obvious. And so I would just take my licks because I knew I was, you know, I deserved it, right? But I remember after like 2.5 years, man, I mean, just such, God had transformed me. And there had been faithfulness. There had been fruit, I think. But my life was just, it was a disaster. And I just wasn't going. And so anyway, I was meeting with this guy. And I remember driving across the causeway. I'll get teary maybe even thinking about it. I yelled at God. I was so mad. I was so mad at him. A, he let me sin in this gross way. B, now I was living for him, and there was like no fruit of it. And my finances were a disaster. I felt like I was no more closer to really repairing the relationship with my wife. I didn't know what I was doing for meaning and purpose. My job was a disaster. Like, it was a disaster.
Yeah.
And I show up to meet with this guy, Frank. And Frank's life was going to hell too. But we were in a men's group together, and I thought things had really kind of got better and with his wife and him, and I had been praying like just fervently for their relationship to be restored. Anyway, it wasn't a long meeting. He just was like, hey, you know, just thanks for meeting me. I've got to go into work, whatever. I just, the Lord just impressed upon me, like, to give you this. And I didn't look at it then. I get in the car, and it's an envelope for $1,000, like a check for $1,000, which at that time might as well have been $1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how, like, low I was.
Yeah.
And in the memo line, it said, for your prayers. And I just remember how impactful that was to me because this evidence that I was looking for, I just had been missing it. It didn't seem like God was real. But when I think about the yelling that took place, because when you step back and now, like 20-some years later, I can go, who are you to yell at God?
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
Like theologically, that was.
Yeah.
But in that moment and in that space, there was all the room in the world to wrestle with God and to scream at him, how could you do this? Because he's big enough to handle it.
Yeah.
As you were talking, that's kind of
no, I think that's great. I think I think he is big enough to handle it. And I think in a good way, a lot of our traditions of faith teach us a holy reverence for God, to respect him, to honor him, to glorify him. And I don't, like, just in case, I'm not like,
to be clear,
just to be clear, I'm not disparaging
reverence for God, good thing.
I think what's interesting though, and again, this is made a little more stream of conscious.
Yeah.
When we talk about God, we speak of God as the Father and the Son and the Spirit. And it's like when you think about God the Father, and I don't want to draw such a big distinction, but like I think a lot of that, it's like Isaiah 6, he's, holy, he's far removed, he's high above, he's, almighty.
Yeah.
But when you think about the Son, not that he's any less worthy of honor and glory, and he has a name that is above every other name, but he came and tabernacled amongst us. He came near, and he is our sympathetic advocate and high priest, because he knows what it's like. And I think why that's so important, because it gives us like opportunity to wrestle with him. Like if I can go on a little side note, like favorite story of wrestling in scripture, is probably maybe the most known one is Jacob. Wrestles with God all night long.
Literally.
I will not let you go until you bless me. So the Lord's like, okay, but you're gonna live your life with a limp. And I think that's such an incredible picture of that Jacob wrestles with God.
It's wild. It's a wild story.
All night. I mean, them dudes. I mean, like they're strong men.
He would have went D1.
Yeah, like wrestling with someone, that's tiring.
Yeah, bro, you wrestle with someone for 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm gassed.
you're done.
Yeah, I'm worn out. I mean, like all night.
Yeah.
And that God lets him wrestle all night. In the moment where it's time for God to go, he blesses him. It's just fascinating.
Yeah.
And I'll be careful how I say this, but to some degree, even Jesus the Son wrestles with God the Father in the garden.
Yeah.
If there's any way possible, can it?
Yeah.
Yet not my will, but yours be done. Like, it's short, it's sweet, but is that not wrestling?
So that was one of the things that I was gonna say was like, wrestling doesn't mean that you abandon reverence. That you can
That's good. That's a quotable.
For your relationship with God, like the same thing with our children, right? Our children, I think children act, it's like 400% worse around mom than they do anybody else, because they feel the safest around mom at a young age. And so you are your worst self around who you are safest with.
Wow.
And now there's a level where that crosses a line of disrespect. If you do it publicly. Or if you do it in a not safe place. And I think what I see constantly in the scriptures is this wrestling with God, but in a reverent setting. So in the garden, in the tent, these are private settings where he's not disrespecting God amongst masses, right? You're not yelling at God outside of your car on the pulpit, right? I think that's where it can abandon reverence, but that we should feel safe enough to be like, God, this is like, there's no point in acting like, that I feel this way, so let's just hash it out. I think that there's a way for us to do that maybe people just haven't been discipled to.
Man, I'd say keep going, because you hit some really good things there. I think the thing you said, two things you said, like we can reverently wrestle. I think that's a good word. I think that's a helpful way to look at it. But I think what you just said, the last thing you said, like it's not been brought into our discipleship. And I think part of where I struggled in my discipleship has in relationship to this is that like so continuing your theme, like someone you're wrestling with, if it's not a foe, right? If it's and we're not calling God a foe.
Yeah.
Usually the people that you're wrestling with are those who you're closest with.
That's
Yep.
right.
Buddies, brothers, friends, whatever. And so I think it's like when we understand like the wrestling dynamic is a part of our discipleship because it's a part of our just communing with God.
Yeah.
I think it does give room for vulnerability, for authenticity.
Yeah.
That I think, speaking of manhood, like it's not been modeled well.
Yeah.
And thankfully Scripture models it well for us.
Yeah.
Jacob is a very successful man. He's a very entrepreneurial, cunning, strategic, strong, faithful man. But yet he wrestles vulnerably with God. So I think like a passage like this and other examples shows us that like wrestling in and of itself is not violating like your
You don't
contract
threaten
with God.
God.
Yeah, we're definitely not threatening God. And even God's response to Jonah feels very like paternal.
Yeah.
Like
Totally.
like
I love it.
Jonah, like
Yeah.
like really, like you can just see God like and another great example, and I'll just mention is Job. Like all Job is like Job wrestling with God.
Yeah.
And really, if anybody was allowed to,
It was
other
Job.
than Jesus,
It's Job.
It's Job. Yeah.
And honestly, in a different way, God kind of says the same thing to Job. Like, were you there when I did this? Were you there when that happened? Like, really, Job?
Yeah.
Like, really, Jonah? So I think that said, though, in a good way, like those are moments where on the other side of you yelling at God, on the other side of me like being like, really, this is what it is.
Yeah.
It allows us to voice something that we've been holding on to. And when we voice it, either directly or indirectly to the Lord, it lets us get past it. And on the other side of that, there's a lot of grace.
Yeah.
But it's hard, though.
Yeah.
Isn't it healthy though?
Oh.
I mean, people pay a lot of money to therapists to be able to say to that therapist what they haven't been able to say to God or anybody else.
And I think there is a place for counseling and therapy.
For sure.
But I think if that counseling and therapy leads you to that place of the Lord, it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
But
I think
it's not a supplement, or
yeah,
it's not
like
a
you've got to
replacement
have a
meal
moment
for it. Yeah.
Like you've got to have a moment where you wrestle with God, or moments, or like it is foundational, and I would even say formational to our maturity.
Oh, that's good.
And if there's any pushback, I'm like, Jesus himself demonstrated. It's short and sweet, but it's a proper, healthy, reverent, honoring wrestling with the Lord.
Yeah.
He did it. Like is it possible? Is there any other way? I am sorrowful unto death. I don't, I would, humanly speaking, not want to do this.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, because he's the perfect Son of God, not your will but mine be done. That is wrestling in its best form, in its most beautiful form.
Yeah.
We're wrapping up here, so this is so good. I am really excited to get feedback from men who are given permission to wrestle, because the wrestling is not intrinsically sinful. Now, in Jonah's life, we could debate. Maybe it was.
You can have a sinful moment, but God's not like, you can't do that again.
So I'll say this. I agree. I think because of who we are, sin is involved.
Yeah.
Like somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere there's some sin
Somewhere.
going on.
Wrestling itself isn't sinful, but you can make it sinful.
Yeah.
We can make it sinful, or it can be caused by sinful things.
Yeah.
And maybe not like, it could be like something done to us sinful.
Yeah.
But I think wrestling in of itself is not sinful.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much time I have, but I just want to touch on this as well.
Please.
So, Jonah is saying a lot here, but this is something that I think is important to acknowledge. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. I've had someone say very similar language like that to me recently. I would, before I've wrestled with the Lord here in the past couple of years, I would have looked at a statement like that, someone saying that, I was like, how dare you? Like, how could you? And I think it's like there have been a couple points in the past 9 years of this journey where I've had thoughts of like, everyone would probably be better for me, or it'd be better for everyone else if I was not here.
Yeah.
And you know what that infers and suggests.
For sure.
And I think even those deep and dark thoughts are a part of wrestling. But I would say also as a part of your wrestling need to be brought before the Lord. I think often when I first felt those, I didn't tell anyone. And I was ashamed.
Yeah.
I felt guilty. I felt awful. I never felt those before. And it's not like I'm like happily to admit it now. Like
sure.
like I struggled with self-harm and at a couple moments suicidal thoughts. But I think what's so important about wrestling with God is that we don't hold back. Like if you're gonna wrestle with God, wrestle with God.
Yeah.
Bring it all to Him.
Yeah.
He's not too big. Like He's big enough to handle it.
Yeah.
And I would say it brings you to a point of like, I've got nothing left.
Yeah.
And I really feel like that's where the best work begins. When you get to the point of, I don't have anything left to figure it out, fix it, whatever we want to do. God can handle all of that and more, but don't hold back.
Yeah.
And again, I'm taking a little bit of a weird angle on it because Jonah's wrestling it's pretty ugly.
Yeah.
And it's pretty messy. But, you know, he's no different than us. And we all have that ugliness and mess in our lives. So might as well bring it to the one who can, might as well bring it to the one who's gracious and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love.
Yeah.
That's
I
good.
mean, if we're going to bring it to anybody,
Yeah.
might as well bring it to him.
Yeah.
Amen.
Right?
All right, last thought.
Yeah, last thought.
Because we could go.
Yeah, we'll do this forever.
We could go for a long time. We have to do this every time, by the way. This is so good. But, you know, there are guys watching who want to take a step, right? So what we're talking about right now is a lot of orthodoxy and some experiences that we've had, but it's a lot of theology. How do we take the theology and put it into practice? What's the one or two things that guys can go, you know what, here's a practical step that I can take in this idea that it's okay to wrestle with God. You mentioned earlier Jonah is honest, right? You also talked about his pettiness. You talked that wrestling is foundational, even formational, this reverence. So what's one or two things guys can take?
So, you know, you can wrestle with God driving in your car along a causeway. That's possible.
Just stay in one lane.
Yeah. Maybe not safe.
Yeah.
Safest place. So I'd say like so sometimes you may not know you need to wrestle with the Lord on something. Maybe you're unaware that you are wrestling. So I would say a practical step is part of your discipleship and your growth. Like when you think about wrestling, like humanly speaking, there's a mat, there's a place. Sometimes there's even a referee and there's things that are involved. Like to wrestle, you can wrestle on your couch in your living room. You can wrestle wrestling has some nuance to it. So I would just say, practically speaking, make time in place in your life for moments to wrestle with the Lord. They could be informal, like, hey, I need to carve out 3 times a week a 30-minute walk around on the beach, around my neighborhood, where I just have some things that I just verbalize out loud. Like I'm making an informal place of wrestling. Sometimes it may be like there's something that you're like, I can't figure this. I feel defeated by, or I feel frustrated by. Like, you might need some help in your wrestling. Like, wrestling isn't, like I said this earlier about God, like, wrestling isn't abstract. Like, we know what wrestling is. And wrestling with the Lord ought to include some of the same practical steps. So make a time and a place to bring those concerns, those things to the mat. And make it a time and space where you can be free from distractions, free from interruptions, to grapple. And know that it might be a long session, it might be a short one. Like, I think it's like any wrestling, like Jonah's is circumstantial. And a lot of our wrestling can be circumstantial. But I think if we're making time and place for regular communion with the Lord, our wrestling with him won't feel like it's adversarial.
Yeah,
that's good.
It will feel like it's communal. And it, when you wrestle with a friend, it's fun.
Yeah,
you can get out of hand, someone can get hurt and mad, but you walk away and like, yeah, we're bros, we're closer now.
Yeah.
And I think so. Practically make time in your schedule, in your, however you keep calendar your days, make a time and a place regularly to wrestle, to get away, to get alone, and bring things to the Lord that are heavy with you. I'd say secondly, some of my best wrestling has been alone with the Lord, like in those type of moments, my back patio, in a car. Some of my best wrestling with the Lord has been in community. So to have fellow men in my life that know me, love me, know my story, that will allow me to wrestle out loud with them. So it's like Acts 13, unrelated, but when that church was together praying and fasting, the Lord moved in their midst and they collectively commissioned Paul and Barnabas to go. I think there's some moments, like for me, I thought a lot of my wrestling with the Lord about what he had brought in my life was just like in the sense of like, it should have been better. It should have been different. I've done this faithfully. I've done this. And when my friend Aaron was like, bro, like this, that was, I believe, the Spirit of God, like what God said directly to Jonah, like, do you do well to be angry? Aaron, I think the Spirit was speaking, Ken, do you do well to be petty about this?
Yeah.
So I think practically, if there are not men in your life that are walking with you, you're missing out on hearing from the Lord.
Yeah. That's really good.
Making time and space practically for it. Like anything, like, your own physical exercise, your own spiritual walk, making time and place to wrestle with the Lord. But then also intentionally having men in your life that know you, that are vulnerable with you, I think is a big part of it. Any more, like any more practical than that? Those might be like
those are
expected answers.
Well, listen, they're the answers that we need, right? And I love that because a lot of times the wrestling is circumstantial, and I kind of gave one, you gave example of the circumstantial. I love the idea of, no, I'm going to make a time and a date every week where you and I are going to, we're going to go as a sparring session, and it's friendly, but it's like, okay, here's what I'm dealing with, or, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Like it's, I love it. It's not adversarial when it's done that way.
Yeah. And I mean, and the nice thing about this, even here with Jonah, like we know that from like for those of us in Christ, God's view of us is never adversarial.
Yeah.
That's comforting. Now we might feel adversarial towards him, like as Jonah does now, but like Jonah shows us who God is. He's not looking at you or me or you and our wrestling as like, that's my foe. That's my son. That's my brother. And so I think that's important because we might feel like burnt or frustrated or irritated with God for whatever reason, but it's never because it's adversarial.
Yeah. Amen.
And I think that's important because like, you guys played sports. Like what athlete doesn't get frustrated or irritated or angry with his coach?
Yeah.
Especially a good coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's, so I would just say like another practical thing. Like wrestling with God, I think is circumstantial for all of us to some degree. It's inevitable, but I think it is a skill that can be developed. Meaning, like I got a buddy who's part of my church that goes to jujitsu.
Yeah.
I've been picturing that my whole
a couple days a week, which is ridiculous, you know. Whatever. That's I don't go to jujitsu, and there's, you can tell probably absolutely. But that being said, it's like at first he goes to jujitsu and it's a good workout, right? But he gets trashed, and it's like it's just him receiving, you know. But then like when he grows in skill, it becomes more enjoyable, and he still might get pinned or he still might get beat,
exhausted,
but he's like always exhausted from it. But he comes away like, that was awesome.
Yeah.
That was worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I think it's like the moments when we're forced to wrestle, those sometimes are ugly, and those sometimes are very circumstantial.
Yeah.
But if we develop that skill of wrestling with God, we still might come out exhausted.
Yeah.
We still might come down, we got pinned.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like we're fighting for our lives.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm doing this to grow.
Yeah.
Jesus, how many times do we hear Jesus goes away?
Yeah.
Jesus goes to the desert. Jesus, he's communing, like wrestling with God's purposes in his life.
Yeah.
So I think it's a skill to be developed. I think is a language that men we'd appreciate, because you can get good at wrestling with God. Truth be told, I think the better skill you are at wrestling, the more he can demonstrate his own strength. So be ready for that.
Yeah.
But I think the more you wrestle with God as a skill, the better you get, but also the more he shows you how good he is too. So, you know, it's like enter the ring with caution, but it's worth wrestle.
Enter it. I think that's what I'm getting from you. Is like, because most guys aren't doing it. That's just the truth. They're so thinking about other things in their life, like God, wrestle. No, I'm not thinking about that at all.
Yeah, it's, man, you know, my biggest wrestling with God, I'll say this as a final note, came around my vocation. Like sometimes I think when we think about spirituality, masculinity, it feels like sometimes like spirituality, walking with Jesus feels sometimes like it's not effeminate. It's not a feminine. Like I think sometimes
we're tempted to think that.
We're tempted to think that.
Yeah.
The biggest wrestling moment I've had with God personally revolved around the work of my hands, like what I do.
Yeah.
And so it was intense, because it wasn't just what I do. Often as men, what we do speaks to who we are.
Yeah.
It's an identity issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And God won that match, like decisively. But it doesn't, like, wrestling is a part of our spiritual growth, and part of us being manly and part of manhood is being formed into the image of the perfect man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The perfect man wrestled with the Lord.
Yeah.
And if he did it, then I think we're invited to do it as well.
Yeah.
And it's a life-changing practice.
Yeah.
No,
And it speaks into the things that are most important to us: our work, our sexuality, our family, all those things that we feel we want to keep inside.
Yeah.
The invitation is to bring them to the Lord and wrestle with him about them.
Yeah. It's good.
No, yeah, the physical parallels to the spiritual are so evident, because when you talk about martial arts, there's this understanding of controlling emotion, of being able to, like, yes, your body's in fight or flight, and now you're having to regulate.
Yeah.
And the same way in the spiritual, we have to do the same things. And then when you're learning from your master, right, from the guy that is in charge of all of it, you then move like him.
Yeah.
You model exactly how he thinks.
Yeah.
Hey, you should have done this move this way. And so really wrestling with God is part of how he forms us to think like him. So appreciate you, bro. This has been amazing.
Yeah. Thank you,
That's
Pastor
kind.
Ken.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the invite and love what y'all are
We
doing.
love that takeaway.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for joining us on this episode of the Patros Podcast, Masculinity Through the Bible, Jonah the Reluctant Leader, and we'll see you guys on the next one.